Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel and welcome back to the Style Studios. I am so excited about today's video because it is a thrift flip, and not just any thrift flip. We are going to be flipping a swimsuit. So we are going to completely deconstruct, take apart a swimsuit and redesign it into something that is trendy and cute and just in general fits me and my style of swimsuits that I like. So I thought that this would be a super fun project to do a thrift flip of. But for those of you who are new and don't know who I am, my name is Madison. I'm an Instagram creator, blogger, and high school fashion design teacher, and here on YouTube I film sewing videos and tutorials to share my love and passion for fashion with you all. You can also follow along on all of my style adventures over on Instagram at Miss Madison Lynn, or check out my blog for tidbits and details of things that I write about fashion. But without further ado, let's dive into this project and talk about what we are going to be doing and what we are redesigning today. Alright, so like I said, today's video is a thrift flip of a swimsuit. I kind of got this idea when I was thrifting a few weeks ago, and I was looking through the swimsuits and thought that it would be really fun to kind of redesign a swimsuit that I found, because making swimsuits is honestly really fun, and I feel like everyone always thinks that they're really hard, and they're actually a lot easier to make than you would think. So I thought a thrift flip would be fun in regards to this. So this is the swimsuit we are going to be using. So this is the suit. Obviously this is a swimsuit that would not fit me. That was my main reason in picking this, is I wanted to pick a suit that would have plenty of fabric that I could work with. I'm not a person who wears like bikinis, and so we are not making that style of swimsuit, so we definitely needed enough to make like a really cute kind of tankini retro inspired type thing, and you'll see that as I go through the design process. But it's super colorful. It's kind of a fun print because it's almost like painted in a way. It's like very artsy. So it has this skirt which has a ton of fabric. Obviously it has the underneath section, it has all this ruching, which is great fabric, the top, and then these really cool sleeves which are also like mesh. So I feel like you can do a lot of fun things with that. But we are going to be taking this apart and completely deconstructing it, and then using the fabric to make the actual swimsuit. And I'm going to be using another swimsuit that I have that I actually made like 2 years ago as the pattern for the suit. So I'll show you how I'm going to kind of create the pattern from that. So yeah.
Okay, so this is what the swimsuit looks like before I completely take it apart and redesign it. And as you can see, there's a lot of fabric to work with, which is one of the main reasons that I got the swimsuit when I was at the store thrifting. So I planned out my design in my new bullet journal to plan out all of my projects. I'm so excited about these pages. So it lets me have areas for writing details of things I will need for the project, and then also sketching out my designs. So I have two different tops that I'm looking at making for the swimsuit, and it definitely changed along the way through this process. I sketched out pictures of my pattern pieces, and then I also have my swimsuit bottom style that I'm going to go with, which is a retro kind of side ruching, and I absolutely love it. Alright, up next is the deconstruction, which means completely taking apart this swimsuit so that all that's left is fabric pieces. So I did this by using a seam ripper and by using scissors, and it was quite a tedious process, so I just decided to time lapse it so that it would go a lot quicker in this video. So here's what that process looked like. Alright, next up, it's time to make the pattern. So I'm going to make my pattern by tracing a pair of swimsuit bottoms that I already had. This is a pair that I bought a couple of years ago, and I actually used them to make the pattern for my first swimsuit 2 years ago. And I absolutely love them because they're kind of a mid-high waist. I'm actually going to extend the waist on these for this pattern, but I also love the ruching detail on the side, which I'm going to incorporate in my design. So I'm just going around and tracing it. The great thing about swimsuits is that because you're using stretchy fabric, you don't actually have to add seam allowance, so you just basically trace it and it becomes your pattern. So I shifted my swimsuit bottoms down to extend the waistline because I wanted this style to be extra high-waisted, and this pattern piece is going to work as the back of my swimsuit bottoms. And we're going to do something else different, using this pattern piece to create the front two different types of pattern pieces for the front section. Alright, so for drafting the front pattern piece for these swimsuit bottoms, I'm going to trace the back piece because it has the general shape that I want for my front sections, but then I'm going to end up extending a crotch, and then I'm also going to divide it into kind of 3 different pieces because there's going to be a middle panel and there's actually going to be 2 side panels that are going to be extra long, which are then going to be gathered in the fabric to create those gathered details. Here I'm creating the middle panel for the front of my swimsuit bottoms. This is not going to be gathered, it's just a straight piece with a high waist and then obviously that extended crotch. I'm just checking it with the other pair of swimsuit bottoms I had made in the past. And then now I'm going to start creating the side panel. So the side panel is going to be connected to the waist based on my waist measurement, but then I'm going to extend it to be extra long so that I have plenty of fabric to gather to create those nice gathered ruching panels on the side, which kind of give it that retro flair. Alright, now it's time to start cutting the actual fabric, and I did have to be really strategic about this to make sure that I was cutting my pattern pieces out of the right pieces of fabric to make sure that I had enough for all of the pieces I needed to create for this project. Thankfully I did, and I'm also using my rotary cutter, which is just the easiest tool for cutting fabric because it's quick and super precise, especially for fabric like swimsuit fabric, which tends to be a little slick. So I ended up keeping the front section of the swimsuit that was the bodice the same shape that it was because I knew it would work really well for my design, but then I kind of played around with how I wanted the kind of top of my swimsuit to be. I ended up veering away from what I originally sketched it as, and I also kind of played around for a while to see if I wanted to use the mesh on the sides of my swimsuit or on the back, like across the back. I thought that would look really cool, but in the end I ended up going with a super simple style with kind of a V-neck in the front, kind of almost some curved across the top of the bodice, and then just like a ruffle at the bottom that I end up adding. And for the swimsuit we also need to line it, so I'm using actually the extra leftover fabric from my strawberry dress. It's just a stretchy like polyester knit type fabric, and it works really well for my swimsuit, so I'm cutting out all of my pattern pieces again from my lining. Once all of my pattern pieces were cut out, I took it over to my serger to connect the lining and sew it to the swimsuit fabric. So you could do this with a normal basting stitch or with a zigzag. When you're working with lining, it's really nice to attach it to your outer fabric before you start sewing it all together. That way you're only working with really one layer instead of two, especially when it's something slick like swimsuit fabric. So now all of my lining is attached to my outer swimsuit fabric, and this makes it a lot easier to work with as we continue through. So next up we are going to gather the side panels, and then we are going to start attaching the bottoms together. So the first step in creating the swimsuit bottoms is to gather the side panels. So we are going to add basting stitches to both sides of those side panels, gather them, and then attach it to the front midsection. So here's what that process looks like. I'm just going in and gently gathering both sides of those side panels and then kind of measuring it to make sure that it aligns properly with that midsection of the front of my swimsuit bottoms. And then once it's the perfect length, we're just going to tie off the ends and pin it to the front section so we can start sewing it together and forming the front of our swimsuit bottoms. So since the sides of those gathered panels are going to be attached to the sides of the back, I also need to measure those and make sure that they are the proper length to be sewn together. So now we are going to go in and sew the sides of the front to the sides of the back, and then we're also going to sew those two sections in the front of the swimsuit together to attach the midsection of the swimsuit bottoms in the front to the gathered side panels. So here's what the bottoms look like all sewn together. So next up is to add the waistband and sew the crotch together. So I took a break from my bottoms to work on my bodice. So like I said, I'm going to have kind of a sweetheart kind of shape in the front of my bodice, and then the back is just going to be straight across. I'm going to add straps, and then eventually later on down the road you'll see me end up adding kind of a little small peplum ruffle to add some length. I kind of randomly added that in at the end because I realized that the bodice and top of the swimsuit was a little too short for me and I wanted to have a little bit more coverage. But it's a super basic, easy bodice, just kind of straight across in the front, and then a straight across in the back, and then I'm also cutting out lining for that as well. I was also able to reuse the pads in the original swimsuit and just cut them down to be smaller, which is awesome because I always like to have pads in my swimsuit. So I just attached those using a zigzag stitch to the lining of my swimsuit, and I just pinned them on after fitting it to myself and kind of figuring out the right placement. I also went ahead and sewed the sides of the swimsuit top together on both the lining and the outer fabric, and so now we are just going to attach the lining to the swimsuit top by pinning right sides together, sewing all the way around, and then flipping it right side out so that all of the seams are hidden on the inside. And I actually decided to attach this using my serger. If you use a straight stitch on swimsuit fabric, it's totally doable, but it has a little less stretch rather if you were going to use, let's say, a zigzag, which has a lot more stretch if you don't have a serger. And if you have a serger, that is the best stitch to use because you still get a lot of stretch and give in your swimsuit fabric. So that's why I decided to go in with my serger, also known as kind of an overlock stitch, and just attach my lining to my outer fabric. As I was sewing this, I realized that I forgot to add in my straps and pin them on the inside, so they were kind of sandwiched in between the two layers. So in the next scene right here, you will see that I actually end up going in and kind of ripping out holes to add in my straps because I didn't want to actually sew them directly to the fabric. I wanted them to be a little bit more inconspicuous, and so it ended up working out well in the end. Something else I ended up doing was kind of straightening out those curves on the front of my swimsuit bodice. When I tried it on, it didn't really fit really well. It was kind of gappy, so I actually ended up going in and kind of straightening the curves for a better fit. So it honestly became more of like a tank top style rather than like a sweetheart neckline in the front. And here I am going in and adding my straps I forgot to add the first time, so I just ripped out little sections in the front and the back where I wanted my strap placements to be, and then inserted them to be sandwiched, and then I took them back over to my serger and serged those holes shut so that I could actually have straps now on my bodice. Then I went back in with my serger and reattached my straps to close all of those holes on my bodice. So throughout this project, I used both my serger and my sewing machine with a straight stitch. When I made my swimsuit for the first time, I didn't have a serger, so all I did was use a straight stitch and a zigzag on my sewing machine, and it still works perfectly. So here's what the top looks like with these straps attached. I really love how it turned out. So next up, we're going back to the swimsuit bottoms, and I'm actually going to add a waistband to these bottoms. 1, to give it a better fit, 2, to add a little bit more length, and 3, because I actually want to use elastic on the waistband for these specific bottoms. I didn't use it on my first pair of swimsuit bottoms, but I figured it would work a lot better just to keep a better fit and also make the waist not as loose as it has been in the past. So I just cut about 2-inch wide pieces of fabric, attach them into a circle, fold them in half, and then I'm going to pin those around the waist of my swimsuit to create a channel that my elastic is going to fit into. Something else weird that I added to these swimsuit bottoms was these extra little kind of slivers of fabric to the back side of my swimsuit bottoms. When I tried them on, I realized they were a little too cheeky for me, so I ended up going in and adding these kind of curved pieces to kind of curve out the back of my swimsuit bottoms, and it actually worked out fine, and you can barely tell that they're there. So in the future, I would probably redraft the swimsuit bottoms to be a little bit more full coverage, but that's okay. This worked, and we're just gonna roll with it. Something else I did different for this swimsuit was add elastic around the leg holes of my swimsuit bottoms. I hadn't done this in the past, but I figured I would try it for this project. I actually saw Micarah Tewers do it on her swimsuit tutorial, and I thought it was a really good idea to add elastic for better fit and also just for more stretch, so I added that to my leg holes. I also used elastic in the waistband of this project, and I ended up using it in the bodice, and I really love how much it helps the overall fit. So for this, I just pinned it around and I overlapped my fabric, and then I used a straight stitch to attach it. In the future, I would probably have rather used a zigzag. I think it would have just helped the stretch a lot more, but the straight stitch worked okay. It would just had a little bit of bumpiness around the back. And now we're going to go in and add elastic to the waistband, since I left that channel available to add elastic for a better fit. So like I said, I ended up adding a ruffle to the bottom of my swimsuit bodice because I wanted a little bit more length. So with all of the leftover fabric that I had, I cut a ruffle that was about 2 inches long. I kind of had a couple of different pieces together. I gathered it and I'm just going to attach it to the bottom of my swimsuit, and it actually turned out really well, and it also gave me a little bit of length, so when you're wearing the full swimsuit it almost looks like a one piece, which I really love. So here's what the top looks like with the ruffle added. Like you can see, it gives it kind of a little extra flare, which is really fun. And then next up, I ended up going in and adding elastic to kind of the waist section of the bodice. 1, because it actually makes it fit a lot better, and 2, because adding the elastic actually helped me to sew down the kind of seam of my ruffle so that my ruffle didn't stick out and was a lot more flat against my body, and it looked so much better, so I'm really glad I did this. And the elastic was actually from the original swimsuit, so I was able to recycle that, which I'm really proud about. And with a straight stitch and sewed a straight line right over where all of my pins were, and that is actually the placement for sewing down the seam for my ruffle, and the seam ended up being like right above my ruffle, so on the outside it actually looked really good and you can hardly tell it's there. And this is what it looks like with the elastic sewn on. Like I said, there's just a seam right above the ruffle, and the elastic really helps in the overall fit. And that's a wrap on the swimsuit, so here is the reveal. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you were inspired by what you saw, and maybe even a little bit encouraged to know that making a swimsuit is not as hard as it might seem. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel, and I will see you all next time.